Joining me now, Super Bowl champion Howard Cross. And Howard, before we get into some of the NFL free agency stuff, I know you have a big game tonight. You've been paying close attention to March Madness. I'm a Florida Gator, so Oral Roberts pretty much crushed my dreams. How you doing?
So far, so good. Alabama's done a great job. They had an incredible year. It's been a while since we have entered into the tournament, and now we come in at a 2 seed, which is pretty impressive. But should be a tough game tonight against Maryland.
You know, we both come from powerhouse schools in terms of athletics. You more so than me have more experience with this. But I mean, how proud are you to just be a part of these universities that continue time and time again to be there when it counts?
You know, it's fun. This has probably been one of the toughest years. I know that the world's, going through a lot, but, sports in general, student athletes trying to figure out their way and navigate this whole pandemic moment and being quarantined, being away from their families, not getting to visit their families, trying to stay away from their friends and do the right thing. It's been a very interesting year for college sports all around.
Yeah, no question. All right, so let's get into some free agency stuff with you. There's a lot of value to be had still. I know we've got a couple more weeks of this, but it seems like over the last week at least, we saw a lot of re-signings, guys coming back into the fold. And I'm just curious, before we get into some specifics, how you view that, what the advantages are of, big free agency splash signings are great and big names, all that stuff is really fun. But when you bring back some of those core key contributors, where's the advantage in that for NFL teams?
Well, it all depends. I think this year was really handicapped by the salary cap being lessened because of the pandemic. They lost a lot of money in the salary cap. So then teams have to figure out what they're going to do, which automatically puts so many teams over the cap to begin with. So re-signing your guys, sometimes you're Pro Bowl guys, sometimes the guys with the C on their chest, just isn't an option because you just can't afford them with the salary cap. If you could keep all your guys, if they were all healthy, it'd be a great thing. Look at Kansas City getting rid of both tackles, but both tackles didn't play in the Super Bowl. So you can understand why they let both of those guys go. But both guys are Pro Bowlers. So it's like, 6 in one, half a dozen in the other. If you have a huge need on the team and a guy just happens to fall into your lap, then you make out like a bandit.
Pittsburgh reportedly moving a couple of pieces around to bring JuJu Smith-Schuster back. Good decision for you. And where does Ben Roethlisberger potentially coming back for one more season play into that?
I never liked the one more season guy. Nothing against Ben. Ben's a nice guy. I've known Ben for years since he got in the league. But one more season, you never play well in the one more season scenario almost. This has to be like the perfect storm. You start making rash decisions because it's your last time at the helm or your last time playing. So you want to play with the ideal that, I don't know when I'm going to retire. But if you have your season, then it's your season. It's kind of like what Drew Brees did. He wasn't sure he was going to retire, but he gave it his last shot this year.
And I'm assuming, everybody knows the value of a guy like JuJu. Is that a wise play for the Steelers to do whatever they need to do to move their limited cap space around so that they can get him back?
I think he did a short-term deal, though, right? Like a 1-year deal or something. Like he didn't do like a 5-year deal or a 3-year deal. They really went into it with caution. I think a lot of players, not just JuJu, but a lot of players are signing 1-year and 2-year deals because they realize the salary cap is going to bump back up. We just saw the huge contract from all the networks pushing it up to over $10 billion a year just in network revenue alone. So these guys are knowing that, hey, if I sign a long-term contract now, the market will move so far in 2 years that I'll be back under market. So they're trying to figure it out. Guys who are betting on themselves and thinking they're going to be healthy for another year or two, those are the guys that are going to benefit the most from this.
You being a New York Giant, you know what the New York market is like, of course. Kenny Golladay was a big signing, Giants spending a ton of money on him. At least that's what a lot of people perceive. And then you've got with the Jets, Corey Davis. When you look at the receiver position, just because we were talking about JuJu, who do you think won there in terms of decision making between those two?
Well, if Golladay stays healthy, then the Giants won. He was definitely a very sought-after receiver by a lot of teams. His last year, though, he was riddled with injuries. If he can come back and be totally healthy and not take every ball that's being thrown in the air, but, be that guy, that go-to guy, the guy that takes the guy that's the most dependable, he can take the cover off of a defense. He can go up and get the contested balls. Then you've paid the right guy.
with the amount of money that they spent on him and him only playing 5 games last season, I mean, is that a risk that you have to take as an organization to pick up a receiver of his caliber, or, could they have potentially really put themselves in a tough spot here?
Time will tell. With guys like Smith from Alabama, Waddle from Alabama, the kid from Chase from I think from LSU. I think there's another couple guys that are going to come out in the draft that are going to be really good. You don't know what team's going to grab those guys coming up in the draft. If you get really high on those guys and then all of a sudden he's not there, then you take a step back. It's better to sign a guy that you can kind of depend on to be your number one. And if he comes in and he's the guy that everyone believes he'll be the number one. Also, they signed the kid from Cincinnati. That was their former number one pick. So that kind of helps, them in 2 aspects. They got 2 big-time potential playmakers at receiver.
When you look at Tampa's offense, obviously stacked, coming off of a Super Bowl win, Rob Gronkowski said this week that he thinks potentially they could be better next season now that they have a little bit more time for guys to get acclimated with the playbook. And you mentioned, the pandemic, the shortened offseason, everything was kind of very haphazard over the course of the last season. And they are also following that trend of re-signing some key offensive players. Do you see them potentially being better this next season, at least in this point in time, than they were offensively last year?
It'll depend mostly on their offensive line. I think their skill position guys go without saying. They got probably some of the better as a group of skill position players probably in the league as a group, from tight ends to receivers to running backs. They seem to have a lot of spaces, covered. And of course, you got number 12 and handling the ball, even though he's like 70, he can still make plays. I believe though that unfortunately every year you get a year older. So guys that have a couple nicks and bangs last year, they don't go away for them when you're an older player. You young guys, you don't worry about it. They bounce back pretty good. But older guys, those nicks and bumps, they start to catch up to you, and people will start focusing on them. Last year it was like Tom Brady coming into Tampa. No one kind of knew what to expect. Were they going to run Bruce Arians' offense, or were they going to run somewhat of Tom Brady's kind of offense? They kind of leaned on Tom towards the end of the year. Well, now they've leaned on him. It's on tape. You can watch it. You can find a way to stop it.
I don't know if we're going to know the full extent of the toll of the pandemic that it took on certain players. You mentioned getting nicked up, banged up, another season of wear and tear. One of the things that really resonated with me over the course of last season, and I think a lot of other people too, was the fact that a lot of practices were shortened. A lot of preparation was shortened. Guys really were getting frustrated. They didn't feel like they were being adequately prepared to go out and play on Sunday. And I think we saw a lot of injuries. We saw a lot of, knees, hamstrings, all that kind of stuff. And then once the NFL proved that ultimately they were going to see this thing out, maybe we didn't hear as much about it as we got into the playoffs. But still, a lot of guys had a really tough season last season. All that to say, you mentioned value in between the trenches as opposed to skilled positions. Do you think that teams that are going to be really, really good next season have to prioritize bolstering the offensive and defensive line, getting that protection in there versus going out for like some of these big name skill position guys? It seems like the good teams are the ones that are really, really sturdy and solid up front.
Yeah, everything starts from the front. The guys have their hand in the dirt are the guys that kind of, work the floor of the game. As great as Patrick Mahomes was the entire season, and he's a phenomenal player, great talent, great leader, face of the NFL. You saw what happened to him when he lost both tackles. It was just he was still making plays, but his receivers weren't catching the ball, and the running backs didn't catch the ball, or they didn't get quite as many yards rushing, but he was running for his life the entire time. Not every team has a quarterback that can run around and still make plays like that. So if you don't have your offensive line, as strong as possible, build some continuity so these guys can play together, try to keep them together for the full year, then you have a harder time. The teams that win consistently over the year have the more consistent offensive lines and defensive lines.
just before we let you go, Howard, what's one thing that you're looking forward to over the next couple of months? We'll see how the rest of free agency plays out. Guys are going to get picked up in the draft. But just it seems like this pandemic is starting to level out, and we might have a summer that resembles something of normalcy, if not close. I mean, what are you going to be thinking about over the next couple of months, and what are you most excited about heading into next season?
I think for everyone who's watching, I think you should be watching and paying attention to what happens in this draft that's coming up. There are so many players that are going to be in this draft that elected to not play last season, that opted out their senior year or their junior year, and then they enter in the draft. And it's going to be interesting to see how the NFL evaluates them. They're going to evaluate them on potential, what they saw a year prior. They're judging guys after not seeing them play, not being at their workouts every day. You don't know the mindset of any of these guys. And now you got to wonder, like, how much does this kid want to play? And it's a sad thing to say, but it's a true statement. What kind of commitment are you going to get from these guys that you're touting as the best players to come out, or the best player that you're going to draft? And if the guy doesn't show up, or if he doesn't perform at the level that you expect or that you want, that's going to be on your scouting group trying to figure out if they did the right thing. And if he shows up on the field on Sundays, then it can set you back a long way if you're drafting one of those kids. And I don't want to talk badly, or poorly about them, but that's kind of what every team's trying to evaluate: who they are, who they want to be, and who are they going to be when they play on Sundays.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we'll leave it there. There's a lot to watch in the draft and beyond. I think the ripple effects of this pandemic are far-reaching, to say the least. Howard Cross, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.